I will give you the floor first to Mehrdad. Okay. So the time of the presentation is gonna be limited with 15 minutes. So I hope you will all adjust yourself to the time limitation, because it's really important to have the more time for the answer a question session. So if you don't mind, I can ask all the presenters to promise the timeline with that. And we have Mehrdad from University of Tehran, Iran, and then Mehmet Şirin Oğurlu from Zonguldak, Bülent, Ecevit University, and he's not here yet. And then the third one, Mehmet Rakıpoğlu, he is already joined us from Batman University, Dimensions for Strategic Studies. And the last one is Nurbanu Bulgur. She's already here. Thank you for joining us. Okay, let's start with Mehrdad or Pasandide. Before I will give the floor to Mehrdad, please let me remind you, we are going to have the question and answer session. I will follow the both ways. First one, you can write down your questions to the chat, to everyone. I can see, and all the other audiences can see the questions. Or you can just raise your hand. On the bottom of the line on the Zoom, there is a reaction session, and you can choose the raise hand. I will follow all the reactions, and I will give the right to ask questions. So both ways are okay for me, and just follow my instruction in the question and answer session. Okay, I think everything is set now. We can start with the Mehrdad Pasandide. Could you please tell me how to pronounce your name, then I can pronounce it rightly?
It's Pasandide.
Pasandide. Okay, thank you. The floor is yours, and you can start your presentation.
Thank you, sir. May I share my screen?
Yeah. Do you have the green light on the bottom of the Zoom section?
Yes, yes.
Okay, you can use it right now.
Okay. Hello to everybody. It's a very pleasure to collaborate with you today. We are going to present a comparative study of Iranian Pardeh, Khani and Rajasthani Phad. So we should first say that Pardeh Khani, what is Pardeh Khani, and then what is Phad performance in Rajasthan. So we start with Pardeh Khani. Pardeh Khani is a multimedia art. We know about it mainly after Safavid era in Iran. It's a multimedia art. It has a visual aspect, collaborate with musical aspect, which is mainly melodic poetry singing, and dramatical aspect, which is the kind of performing of the narrator. So the main topics of Pardeh Khani is mostly the epic stories from the Book of Kings or Shahnameh, and religious stories mainly about the Karbala incident and martyrdom of Shia imams. And they were told by a narrator who is called Naqqal or Pardeh Khan. So Naqqals should be a good person and religious person. Mostly they are dervishes and have a great respect among people. They are mostly male. We can't see women as Nagal or Pardeh in past times, but today we have also women as Nagals. And Pardeh is usually occur in coffee houses or qahvekhane, which we know even the Pardeh as a coffee house painting or naqashi qahvekhane. So among the Islamic countries, Pardeh is very unique to Iranian cultural Iranian sphere, and we can't see it in other spheres. So we go to Phad and see what it is. So you may see it as Phad with D or Far with R, but actually the main actually the pronunciation is very hard. It's something like Far, which has a different accent. So Pardeh is very similar. Phad is very similar to Pardeh, and it has a very kind of presence in Rajasthan and some other states around it, like Gujarat. Pardeh is also multimedia. The style of art is a little bit different. It's more Indian painting, in Indian miniatures. But some features, some important features and actually appearances are same in Pardeh and Phad. Like you can see that the main characters are bigger. You can see both evil and good side. The good side have characters of good have very beautiful faces and clothes, but the evil side always have terrible faces and kind of dark, and they're bad. They have bad clothes and performance. So stories are mostly from Mahabharata and Ramayana and local versions of these stories in Rajasthan, like Pabuji and Devnarayan, which they consider as reincarnations of the gods. And the narrators are being called as Bopas. So Bopas can be male or female, can be from any caste, but mostly they are Brahmins. And they came to a village with the Phad and go to a public place like the squares. And after cleaning the sphere, they rise the Phad and start to kind of narrate it to people. And the narration here in Rajasthan is with collaboration of music and playing instruments. So it's another difference with Pardeh. But if we can consider those traditions, Phad and Pardeh, having two aspects of visual storytelling, which is in the curtain, and the musical storytelling. So we should go and see where they came from. Many experts about Pardeh said that it came from the paintings and rock carvings of ancient Iran. But if we go to see the whole region, especially Mesopotamia, India, we can see that some sorts of storytellings are happening. First in Mesopotamia, we have Warka vase, which shows a wedding ceremony of Ishtar and Dumuzi. Or we can see that in Assyrian art, they have rock carvings that show kind of attempts of kings and Assyrian army. But these actually presentations of visual art, we can't say them that they are a storytelling, because it's just show a scene or a historical event, and later on in Achaemenid period, for example, in eastern steppes of Apadana Palace, we can see it's also an historical event. It's not a story. So where we can see a story which is known in literature is told by a visual art. If we go to Mauryan art in India during the Mauryan Empire, one of the main sites is Sanchya Stupa complex. We can see rock carvings of Sanchya Stupa dating back to 3rd and 2nd century BC. They say the Jataka stories, and we know Sanchya Stupa as birthplace of Jataka illustration. So what is Jataka? What are Jataka stories? Jataka stories are stories about birth and enlightenment of Gautama Buddha, and stories around it. We have very elaborate literature about it in both Sanskrit and Pali languages. But in Sanchya Stupa, we can see it as a visual art. So even this visual art is very similar to curtains of Pardeh, Khani and Phad. You can see both evil side and good side, magnification of main character, and these things. We can see some visual features, and we know the story. What is the story? So in upper picture, you can see the story of attacking Mara to Buddha. So Mara, which is an evil character, it has very terrible faces, but Buddha sit very quietly and peacefully and have a beautiful face and clothes. So it's very similar to what we see in Phad and Pardeh. And this form of art later on goes and influence Gandharan art and Iranian arts of mainly Eastern Iran. We can see Panchkent paintings and Kuh Khaje and Bandiyan Dargaz. So these are the sites which is influenced by this tradition. But what about the musical aspect of these Pardeh, Khani and Phad? So we can't say that those illustrations of Sanchya Stupa have a collaboration with music. We don't have any evidence in Mauryan era, but we have in Iran, we have a very big kind of evidence about musical storytellings. You may heard about Gusan, Parthian Gusans, which were the bards who tell the stories, and they are kind of...
Sorry for interruption, but you have just 4 minutes left. Could you please wrap it up? Thank you.
Okay, I will do it. So Gusans are kind of the fathers and ancestors of Bakhshis and Ashiks, where we know they use an instrument and saz and playing music and telling a story. And we can see very informations about them. In other hand, we have a presence of Parthians and Scythians or Scythians in India during the Indo-Scythian dynasties and Indo-Parthian dynasties. So later on in Shunga period, we can see again in Sanchya Stupa that some foreigner musicians with Iranian clothing features and Greek clothing features are playing music around the stupa. So, what's the conclusion of this research? The conclusion is that we can see the visual part of Pardeh Khani and Phad is coming from Mauryan art and from India. So we can see the evidence, but the musical part of these traditions is coming from an Iranian musical traditions by Gusans and later on Bakhshis and Ashiks, and it's actually Iranian because we can't see this tradition further east in India. It's just about Rajasthan and Gujarat, and these collaboration of Iranian and Indians in this area of Eastern Iran and Northwest India make this actually gorgeous art form. So thank you for time you gave me.
Thank you very much for the presentation. That's interesting subject. It's not my area of expertise, but still it raised my attention to it. Thank you. Okay, we will have the questions after all the presenters have finished their presentation. So if you don't mind, I will just move on the second presenter, who is the Mehmet Şirin Oğurlu. Mehmet, you are here, I can see, and
yeah,
you can have the floor and start your presentation. And if you have something to share with us, a PowerPoint or something else, you can just share the screen.
yeah, I have.
Okay.
Is it visible?
It's coming now. Okay, we can see it now. Thank you.
All right, sir, thank you very much for this opportunity to me, first of all, and thanks for having me. So today we are going to be talking about the United Nations in Syria from the perspective of Iran. It's one of the wars that has just been taking place in Syria. First, we are going to be talking about the very onset of it. You know, the fundamental reason for the onset of Syria civil war was the Arabian Spring, the spring of Arab, or we should say that had taken place in many countries and states before the Syria. And one of them was Tunisia, the other one was Egypt. Also, we can say the same things happen in the Lebanese. So these things, the question was actually Bashar Assad, that the New York Times, one of the interview question was that, are you expecting some such thing in your country, your people that can rise against you for the pro-democratic movements or these kind of things? He basically answered that, of course, we do not accept something like that. We are definitely and decisively against and united against the intervention from the NATO or the United States of America or the West, because he considered and assessed the situation that had happened before the things happened in Syria, the things that have just been backed by the West and particularly the United States of America and NATO. So at the beginning, well, it was very unexpected and very unpredicted for the Bashar Assad. He didn't actually know how to answer these or how to respond to these the social movements, we can say, or these demonstrations. So to respond this, he used the exact tactics of his father did before him, the things that with suppressing these demonstrations with the forceful movements and the forceful tactics, we should say. And then we have the opposition party, their main aims and the main targets, of course, just exactly the things we've talked about, the Arabian Springs in other countries, just to the freedom of speech, the protection of the rights, and some reforms, and the many reforms in economy, some reforms in the equality of the justice and the rights in front of the judicial law and some such, because the separation was very big. His and his family generation itself is a part of the Shia, but the majority of the population of Syria itself is the Sunni. So this separation was also making the situation very worse and worse day by day. At the very onset, it was something that just Bashar Assad considered that he can just easily take on it and respond with a forceful, with the tactics that we just mentioned a little bit ago, which his father did. But none of this had happened, and the situation got worse, especially with the reaction of the outsiders. One of them was the United States of America, who had been repeatedly talk about the chemical weapons usage, and also taking some resolution in the United Nations Security Council to act and to respond with the military activity. Of course, Russia and China say that something like that will not happen. First of all, it needs to be investigated. But then all of the things, Barack Obama saw this and as an opportunity, we can say, it can be stated. Then they started to fire, and the situation got very unlikely situation that many parts see that something that shouldn't have happened. But it had happened anyway. The Russia took for the Bashar Assad because he lost one of his main friends in the Libya, which was the Muammar Gaddafi. After the outtake of him he cannot just say that the Syria Bashar Assad himself to go. Soviet Union has also a great partnership with the father of Bashar Assad. So Bashar Assad for Syria was one of the main partners. The basis in Syria also is quite important for the Russia. So these are the main reasons of the conflict: the state government position, the rights and the claims and the things that the opposition parties wanted at the very onset of the civil war, and also the reaction of the outsiders. Now we'll come to the involvement of Iran itself. Why Iran is so involved within the war in Syria. There was an Iraq war, which is still a war, that ongoing war, that's still not kind of a state, it's kind of also in international list by many states is described and recognized as a failed state after the Saddam Hussein gone and the United States of America involved in it. The main objectives and the main aims of Iran, of course, in Syria, because they want to have the dominance in the region, and their battle and the war be not kind of the active war, but such a cold war we can call it, with the Saudi Arabia, because these clashes and the challenges also is still occurring in Sudan itself. Tunisia, for example, one of the sides, Saudi Arabia was supporting one side and Iran was supporting the another one, same situation for others, the Arab Spring places as well. So in Syria, the main objectives of Iran, one of them is, and the most important of them, of course, as we in this map, we can see, to create a sail connection with the Israel. This is through the Golan Heights. It's very important for Syria, in Syria to do for Iran. Secondly, they wanted one of the friends in Syria. Bashar Assad has a very great connection and relationship with the Iran itself. So when they have the Iraq, they have the great power in Iraq. The United States withdrawal from Iraq create enormous the power vacuum for Iran, and in the region, Iran took place of it. We can clearly say that one. So they have that, they want that one, we can say. So in Syria now, they have sailing with them through Iraq. Of course, as we can see in the flag, they don't have clear geopolitical connection with it, but with Iraq, they can do it. From Syria, they can easily do that one. And the relationship between Iran and Syria, as we say, dates back the father of Assad after the revolution taking place in 1979 in Iran. So this one also quite important facts that we should say the reason why involvement that Iran has been made. Iran itself saw this as a great opportunity. Every crisis, we can say in the national relations and these states, when there is a crisis, there is an opportunity, there are the conclusions. But of course, every crisis has an opportunity. So Iran itself saw this as an opportunity to intervene, just exactly the United States of America saw that as an opportunity to involve, maybe to create some dominance and also hold the dominance and the power in the region. Saudi Arabia also has some part of it. Saudi Arabia, at the very beginning of the civil war in Syria, supported the very far right to the demonstrations, supported them very much. So Iran just couldn't let the Bashar Assad and his government basically go. Now, except all of this, the main subject of the presentations, the United Nations peacekeeping, The aim of the peacekeeping operations and objectives is mainly wherever there is a conflict to go, if it's based, whether it's based on the consent of the whole state or not. In many places, it hasn't happened like that one, for example, in Somalia or in Bosnia-Herzegovina, without the consent of the Serbians and the government of the Somalia. They went in and all of them concluded in a very unsuccessful way, and they can be clearly stated the failed and unsuccessful missions. So we saw the same situations here. The United Nations intervention in response to civil war in Syria. So to talk about this one, we're going to talk about the sixth proposal plan, which is being scheduled by the Kofi Annan, the Secretary of the United Nations. We're going to be talking about that in a bit. So the intervention in response to civil war in Syria was mainly to give an end to the causes of and the deaths of the civilians. And the United Nations mission supervision missions in Syria, United Nations supervision mission in Syria, UNSMIS, is deployed after the sixth plan proposal, and we are going to be talking about that one in the next presentation. Six-point proposal, that was the cooperation between the United Nations and the League of the Arab States, which is very important. It was a good cooperation and good relationship actually between them. Took a lot of effort to do that one. It was about 2012. The main actor and the founder of this one six-point proposal and the plan was the man you can see in the picture is the Omar, it was American. So this one is Kofi Annan was actually trying to, at the very beginning, he didn't actually mean to give end to the conflict, but rather to go in and help the civilians, those or crucially needed humanitarian aid. That was one of the main objectives of this six-point proposal. And then we go to the and the fourth proposals was to mainly to give an end to the conflicts and create and provide circumstances and conditions for peace talks, not kind of compel the sides to do it, but rather to do it in a cooperation between the sides and in a peaceful way. And the conditions those asked so as to end the conflict, as we said, these were the conditions, the first of all, to cessation, and of course, the de-escalations of power. But none of them have happened, and ultimately it's ended and it's withdrawal. A bad idea from the start for the United Nations was the underestimation of the threat, because the situation was getting worse and worse by day and day, as we say, that the reaction and the intervention from the outsiders itself. So the United Nations just exactly did in Rwanda and Somalia and also the Bosnia-Herzegovina, in many places that just concluded, and the consequences were devastating and cataclysmic. The same situation had happened here too. They were clearly undermining the threats of the conflict. It wasn't just something that we should go in and finish it and do the things. And the second one, no clear geopolitical plan. The UNSMIS was fastly and very, with a good acceleration actually took place, but we don't know clear geopolitical plan. Nothing they did that they actually should have done. The third one, an unrealistic attempt to end the war without having a strong mandate. This is one of the main reasons for the United Nations peacekeeping operations actually concludes in an unsuccessful way. They clear and they employ these parties and peacekeeping operations, but none of them actually mandated a strong one. In some sort of situations, peacekeeping operations clearly stay with unprotected. They can't even protect themselves. We cannot even talk about the civilians and the protection of civilians, especially those who are clearly do not have anything to do with the conflicts. And the fourth one, which is actually the consequence of all these three factors we just talked, it was deemed to failure. So many of the countries, Turkey itself and also the Iran and the Russia called this sixth proposal plan to doomed to failure. At the very beginning, it was a bad idea because they do not have a clear mandate, the war itself. And also the UNSMIS was also kind of taking some side for the opposition, always asking the Syria, the central government, Bashar Assad, led by the Bashar Assad, always them to stop the war. But the opposition parties and the demonstrations and also demonstrators, actually, I should say, they were also causing the problems. Bashar Assad, after a short period of time, he did something for to answer, to respond in a peaceful way to these demonstrations, right, such as the freedom of the speech, the release of some hostages, and those people who were arrested because of the demonstrations activities. But the things never stopped. The opposition were asking more. It's like just the way you give, the way it's gonna be for the demonstrations. So these are the bad idea from the start, we can call, and it was actually clearly doomed to failure, that United Nations MH6 proposal, and they will withdraw. And the Iran approachment regarding the US miss, and first of all, the aftermath of Iranian invasion within the civil war, as we stated, Iran and the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei had always seen, we say, as an opportunity to intervene. Of course, they didn't want Bashar Assad to step down or stop the conflict the way that they wouldn't like to. And of course, it didn't happen. And that's one of the main reasons, actually, why the United Nations or US miss, United Nations Supervision Mission in Syria had to be withdrawn first, to be suspended, but had then to be withdrawn. The given implications by the UN was clearly just like other missions, which were concluded in a cataclysmic, like clearly unsuccessful, can be described, like Bosnia-Herzegovina and Rwanda, which the genocide had taken place. The conclusions of UN miss, as we say, was clearly unsuccessful. They couldn't actually support the civilians the way they had to, or the way actually they intend to at the very beginning. First, they were deployed for the 90 minutes, for 19 days, I should say. And then they had to suspend it because of the...
left. Excuse me.
Yeah.
You have just 1 minute left. Could you please come to the conclusion? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then they had to suspend it because of the armed conflict and the escalation of the situation in Syria. But then, of course, none of them had happened. For any extension, they asked the General Secretary proposed, and the Security Council had answered this one, that this escalation should be taken place in order to extend, but none of them have happened, and the US miss was withdrawn into 2012. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to me again, sir. And if you have any questions further, I would like to answer. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mehmet. It was a clear and fast presentation. It was a little bit hard to follow, but it's fine. Thank you very much for general projection of the Syrian question at the beginning. And could you please end your screen share, and we can move on the next presenters.
Yeah, I'm stopping a bit, sir. Sorry for that one.
Okay. So the next one is Mehmet Rakıpoğlu. He is already here, I can see. You can start your presentation, and you have 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the organization team for organizing this distinguished conference on Iran. Today, I would like to speak about the normalization process between GCC countries and Iran. And I will touch upon some dynamics in terms of regional politics and international politics. It has been observed that the diplomatic efforts or diplomatic contacts have increased in the Middle East since the end of 2020. Many countries have abandoned the competition and tension and conflict in different parts of the region. In that regard, what we have seen is that the power struggle between GCC countries and Iran, which was considered a chronic problem in the region since 1980s, and many areas of rivalry began to transform. In that regard, the change in the regional politics and the regional order, especially with the beginning of the Arab revolutions, intensified the competition and the conflict between the countries. However, the success of the counter-revolution process, which brought the status quo back after the coup in 2013 in Egypt, and tried to be institutionalized in many parts of the region, the atmospheres in conflict areas such as Syria, Libya, or Yemen, evaluated a relatively positive atmosphere or positive point. This is one of the dynamic that why the normalization process has taken place between GCC and GCC countries and Iran. The second point is that the economic motivations of all countries in the region. You know, after COVID-19 pandemic, what we have seen is that countries in the region, not just in the Middle East, but within the scope of a globe, we saw that countries are preferring economic cooperation since the challenges in terms of economy or finance coming from the pandemic was harsh. So this is another dynamic that explain why GCC and Iran launch a kind of diplomatic normalization. Another one is about the international dynamics. In that regard, I see that United States regional politics have accelerated the normalization process in the region, especially normalization between GCC countries and Iran, since United States, United States doesn't support the GCC countries in a way that they can deal with Iran. On the other hand, we saw that China and Russia, the most important countries or actors in the international dimensions that support Iran in Syria, in other parts of the region, their position or their engagements in the region have significantly increased. So the new diplomatic stage in the Middle East have emerged, and in this regard, I argue that although the diplomatic normalization has taken place between Iran and Gulf countries, this normalization stems from compartment politics rather than multidimensional or institutional cooperation. So in many parts of the region of the countries that I've explained, the competition will continue, but this competition has moved to a manageable point with diplomatic steps. In other words, the diplomatic normalization process moves the competition between these countries from a climate of conflict and tension to a manageable point. In that regard, I will speak about three GCC countries that recently normalized ties with Iran. Bahrain hasn't announced the normalization, but the process has already started. Most probably in upcoming days, months, we will see normalization between Bahrain and Iran. Qatar hasn't, cut its ties, its diplomatic ties with Iran, so I'm not going to talk. And Oman is the same. I'm going to talk about Kuwait, yes, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, because Kuwait was the first GCC country that act quickly by deciding to normalize ties with Iran. In 2022, on August 13, Kuwait appointed a new ambassador to Iran, and he was experienced diplomat. He served in United Kingdom Embassy, in United Nation Mission in Kuwait, and other international diplomacy he served in. So Kuwait has made a long-term investment in Iran by appointing a diplomatically experienced name. In that regard, what we see is that Kuwait was the first Gulf country to take the initiative to normalize ties with Iran. In this regard, I see that Kuwait tried to ensure regional stability, and it played a mediating role in Iran-related problems, especially Gulf crisis that started in 2017 and Gulf Lebanon crisis in 2021. So Kuwait there is a country wants to conduct relations with Iran independently from the Gulf countries or from the countries that are trying to dominate the Gulf politics, such as Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. So that in that regard, Kuwait took an important step in August 2021. And Kuwait's foreign minister attended ceremony in Iran and took a message from the Emir to the president of Iran. In that regard, Kuwait differs itself from other Gulf countries in terms of normalization. And I think the first priority of Kuwait is to ensure the regional stability. The second country that normalized ties with Iran is United Arab Emirates. I can say that it is the same for normalization between Turkey and United Arab Emirates. United Arab Emirates is also a pragmatic country, even though the tension or the eras, regional eras in that United Arab Emirates and Iran have still competing. United Arab Emirates launched a kind of policy to normalize ties with Iran in 2022. Anwar Gargash was the advisor and still advisor to the president, announced that relations with Iran will normalize and Abu Dhabi will send ambassador to Tehran, and it happened. But the problem was the breaking point of relations was in 2016 when the Shia cleric Nimr al-Nimr was executed in Saudi Arabia after to protest against Saudi Arabia raided the diplomatic representations of the kingdom in Iran, and many buildings were destroyed and burned. In that regard, this situation created a kind of synergy in the Gulf against Iran. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf countries like Kuwait summoned their ambassador to Iran, and the relations were reduced to a level of charged affairs. But the regional politics have changed, significantly changed. What we see is that in the region since 2000 and at the end of 2020, there is a trend in the region, and I can call it that it's a normalization trend. And the last step of United Arab Emirates was that it is reported after 6 years, the United Arab Emirates relations with Iran has normalized. And Tahnum bin Zayed, who was in also Turkey before the normalization process, he was the first Emirati official coming Turkey to normalize ties, take a serious step and went to Iran and spoke with the president of Iran, and serious steps were taken to normalize ties. And in May, the ambassadors were sent to the countries to normalize their ties. And the last country is Saudi Arabia. And just few weeks ago, the normalization were implemented or were taking place, but negotiations were on track between Saudi Arabia and Iran by the host. Iraq and Oman were mediator, and individual initiatives were taken, especially from the side of Iraq. Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi accelerated this process, but it is important to note that the normalization has announced in China, not in any countries in the region. So I think there is important dimension to be highlighted that the normalization process was announced in China. So it is obvious that, as many academics have stated, that China's active role in the process can be seen as a challenge to the hegemonic position of the United States, which has been discussed for a long time in academic literature. So this is an important step. In May 2020, it was stated that Saudi Arabia accepted the use of Iran's embassy in Riyadh before the normalization announced. But on the 10th of March in Beijing, the normalization has announced. So the myth that the United States has assumed order establishing role in the region, there have been already told that the United States is controlling the region. This myth has been shaken by the fact that the normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia took place under the mediation of Beijing. On the other hand, Iran and Saudi Arabia's normalization coincided with the Riyadh's chronic problems with Washington. Despite United States President Joe Biden visit to pursue Saudi Arabia to change oil price to detriment of Russia, Mohammed bin Salman doesn't listen. President Biden and continue to cooperate with Moscow. And I think many US allies, especially Saudi Arabia, want to continue cooperation with US from a vision that is completely dependent on Washington informed policy and get closer with actors that increase their influence in the region, such as Russia, China, India, France, or Britain. So the normalization process with these countries, among these countries, I think, of course, it will affect the regional balance of power. In that regard, I have 3 points to highlight. The first one is Yemen.
Before you highlight all the 3 points, you have just 1 minute left. Could you please come to the conclusion?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. The 3 points is about, the first one is Yemen, because Saudi Arabia couldn't succeeded in Yemen, and they want to have kind of honorable exit. To get that point, of course, you have to deal with Houthis, and Houthis have been supported by Iran, so you have to normalize your ties with Iran. This is the first one. The second one is about the Lebanon. In this sense, it can be expected that if Taif agreement that is signed in 1998 will be revised and signed, or diplomatic agreements in different formula will be on the agenda. The third one is this Syria. What we see in terms of normalization with Syrian regime is another example. Saudi Arabia normalized its ties with Iran. Then we see that Saudi Arabia announced that it normalized ties with Syria. So there is a serious dynamism or activism in Gulf-Iran relations, and to some, re-establishing diplomatic relations doesn't mean full institutional cooperation, but this situation is evolving in favor of regional cooperation and stability. Yeah, thank you. I finished my presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. Given that you have given lots of examples from the recent developments, that I think you have some practitioners' role in the region, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. Maybe in Q&A session we will elaborate the details.
Okay. Okay. I am sure you will get lots of questions because it's too recent and might get attention from the audiences. Thank you very much for the presentation. And before wasting too much time, because I want to keep the question and answer session is as much as possible bigger than the presentation. So I will give the floor to the fourth presenters, Nurbanu Bulgur from Sakarya University. She is already here. Thank you very much for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Nurbanu Bulgur. I would like to briefly introduce myself and my field of research. Actually, I am now studying on the Department of International Relations, and I am now continue my PhD degree. I am a PhD student nowadays. And actually, I will share my screen few minutes later. In my PhD thesis, I examined the transformation in Iranian society between 1925 to 1979. I am reviewing the environmental policy of European Union. These are different subjects, of course. However, I'm interested in both Iranian studies and environmental politics. Then I continue in different fields. Therefore, I prefer to prepare my presentation on two different fields of research that I'm interested in. Now I want to share my screen. I don't know if you are seeing my
Yeah, we
screen?
can see it.
Okay.
See.
Thank you. And the title of my presentation is Investigating the Green Purchasing Behavior of Turkish and Iranian Consumers. As I said before, I'm now studying on environmental politics and climate change policy, actually. I'm really interested in these issues. And these are current debate of world politics. Then, actually, first of all, I want to introduce the issue. The purpose of the study and my presentation, of course, is to identify the determinants of green purchasing behavior. Green purchasing behavior, maybe you are not familiar with these terms or terminology, and this means in Turkish, yeşil satın alma davranışı. I will use these words in my presentation. The studies in the literature have investigated the main antecedents of green purchasing that affect consumers' green purchasing behaviors. However, the antecedents of green purchasing differ due to the cultural and economic structure of the countries, Turkey and Iran. For this reason, it is necessary to determine and identify, of course, the sensitivities of consumers in green purchasing behaviors in both local and international markets. Developing market strategies within this framework is of great importance. As a result of this research, actually, it is concluded that environmental knowledge and environmental image concern are the main factors. The green purchasing determinants, we can say, of Turkish and Iranian consumers are similar between the two countries. As the environmental knowledge level of consumers in both countries increases, green product purchasing behavior also increases. Actually, we can say the more the consumers have the knowledge about environmental protection, the more they buy green products or etc. The results obtained within the scope of the research, according to the importance of environmental issues, consumers in both countries are more likely to purchase green products. Especially in between young consumers, this is an issue of prestige to buy green products. In addition, unlike Turkish consumers, Iranian consumers perceive consumer efficacy, tüketici etkinliği in Turkish, as a determinant of green product purchasing behavior, which is another factor affecting eco-friendly trend, environmental friendly, we can say. As in previous studies, perceived consumer efficacy emerged as an important variable in explaining Iranian consumer behavior. If consumers believe that they are individually effective in protecting the environment, they contribute to environmental protection and they buy environmental friendly products. In this case, the negative effects of individual consumption on environmental protection is important also. And the other issue and the other concern for environmental image, which is the most important factor in this research, for identity and approval can often be motivation, especially for young consumers, as I said before. This is important between young people. The main reason for doing so is to introduce themselves to others as environmentally friendly and to be accepted in society. This is both observed in the literature and revealed in this study. As in main studies, consumers' environmentalist attitudes are not reflected in their green purchasing behavior. The reason for this, actually, we can say one of the reasons. Of course, there are many reasons. However, one of the reasons for this behavior is that consumers find the performance of green products low. Ultimately, in order to understand the consumer's behavior towards green products, we should be aware of all factors such as environmental education, environmental attitude, environmental concerns, perceived environmental attitude, perceived environmental responsibility. We can say, we are saying actually perceived environmental responsibilities because it is important to understand the consumer, how the consumers perceive the environmentally friendly products and how they see environmental politics. And it is important to understand these all these variables, we can say. And I want to share a table about my research. The left one, actors, Turkish consumers and Iranian consumers. In the middle, green purchasing behavior predecessors, as I said before, antecedents. It means the same. They are environmental education, as I said before, environmental attitude, environmental anxiety. It is important. And the others I mentioned, environmental image concern, the last one is also important. And all these variables affect green purchasing behavior, we can say, at the end of my presentation. And I want to share some references. I would like to touch on some of them because of the importance in the environmental research. Cananay and Zümrüt Ecevit, they actually carried out some research about environmental friendly products and environmentally friendly consumers actually. And the other research I want to mention about Sinan Erten also, he actually examined environmental education and the importance of environmental education over environmental products or over consumers actually. And the last one, İlham Kiziroğlu, he is also examining the education and environment, both of them. And who are interested in this issue, I can share my presentation and they will examine another time. Thank you for listening to me. This is the last verse for me.
Thank you very much, Nurbanu. It was an interesting
You're welcome.
presentation. Before moving on the question and answer session, I would like to express something. We are humble enough to admit that the context of all the presentations are seems separate from each other because lack of the language restrictions. Sorry about that, but still it is on Iran, and we keep the center point of the conference intact. So sorry, but also it's a good opportunity to have the different perspectives from different areas. And here we go for the Q&A session. And I would like to ask you if any one of you will ask the questions to any presenters you want. You can raise your hand or write it down in the chat section. If you don't have any questions, I might ask presenters to ask you questions if you understand. That's the opposite way of Q&A session. No, I will start first then. That's the challenging aspect of the being moderator. I would like to ask one question to each presenter. Even two of them might be related to my research area, but still I have questions about the art. To Mr. Pasandide, sorry for pronunciation. I would like to ask, still, I try to combine your presentation with my area of research. Sorry about that, but still I would like to ask. You have concluded that there is a cultural interaction between Indian and the Iranian art. So the first question, it came to my mind that who or what was the main transmitter between these two cultures? Merchants, politicians, scientists? Do you have any information about it? I don't know if it is included in your research, but still, I would like to ask about it.
Yes, actually, the eastern part of Iranian, cultural Iranian area, which is today we can see as countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan. In 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, we have presence of Greeks, Indians, and Iranian tribes at the same time in this era. So we have Greco-Bactrians, which are the actually successors of Alexander. We have Indians, came by Mauryan Empire of India, by conquering of these lands by Emperor Ashoka. And we also have Iranian tribes like Arakhosians and Cambodians and Satagosians and Aryans and others that live there. And in other hand, we have Scythians, Scythian nomads, which came from northern parts like Central Asia to this place. So this collaboration occurred by presence of others, all of them at the same time in this actually geographia. So it's not by merchants or others. They came by, by the states, by conquering, and many of them were nomads, like the Scythians. They came down and go actually approximately to Nepal. So we can see them. Yes.
Thank you. So it is the transboundary tribal relations that the cultural transmitted between India and Iran.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, that combines with another question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So it was the historical interactions between India and Iran, but you mentioned that the musical way, or I don't know how to put it correctly, but still, from Iran to India, there is an exchange from the musical perspective and the visual perspective from India to Iran. So
Yes.
why do you think the main reason of this? Do you have any knowledge of it?
Yes, actually, we know about the Gusans, which were the actually Parthian bards in Iranian literatures, both in Pahlavi language and in Farsi or Dari language, and also in Armenian records. We know about the Gusans, and we have them as the first bards of Iranian culture. We know they were Parthian, but during the Sassanid Empire, their presence will be kind of less. But then some kings of Sassanid Empire, they bring them again. So we know about Gusans, and we know that they present in eastern parts of Iran, that Scythians and Parthians lived there. So it was actually it's a very common musical tradition between the nomads. So we can see it in northern parts among the Turkic tribes. Also, we can see it even in Mongolia, like the throat singing and these things. So in this part, the Iranian nomad tribes and Turkic nomad tribes were kind of common in this tradition. But influence came by the Scythians and Parthians, which were Iranian tribes.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really sufficiently answered. Thank you very much. Any one of you, if you ask the questions, please just raise your hand or open your microphone and ask your questions. And I still don't see any raised hand, so I will continue to ask my questions to the presenters.
May I ask a question to Mr. Rakıpoğlu?
Yeah, go for it, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. That was well said. I'm very interested in the politics, especially the relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So you've talked about all of this, the normalization, the process and the procedure between these states in the region, where there is a dominance, the struggle and clash between the two states. But talking all about this realization, you ever mentioned, or actually you mentioned a very, very little about China. Is that basically means that the China has very little to do with it, or is it means that the main focus of your research not based on it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I wrote a paper on a commentary on Turkish journal that in that paper I some part of the paper was focusing on the rise of China. And my PhD was also about the Saudi Arabia's reaction to the changing of international dynamics. And I wrote a chapter, the rise of China. Of course, the rise of China is critical in terms of regional politics in the region, in the Middle East, because what I see is that is a kind of trend that all United States allies, in parentheses, so-called allies, they are trying to find a kind of ground and kind of point that can make their foreign policy more independent from the US. In that regard, they consider the rise of China and the rise of Russia is critical. In that regard, the rise of China became a kind of reality for those countries in the region, for those who are called as an ally of the United States, because the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, they have signed several agreements with China that bothers the United States, not just in economic point of view, but also in terms of military cooperation. It was leaked in the media that China was building a kind of military bases, not military bases, but a building that produce missiles in Saudi Arabia, and it was leaked in Wall Street Journal. So it is obvious that the rise of China is a new phenomenon in the region, and most of the Gulf countries, they are taking serious, and they're taking steps towards the rise of China, and they don't care what the United States has pressure or has imposed on them. So I think there is a kind of new phenomenon. It's not a new phenomenon, but it is emerged as a new phenomenon, and it is a kind of way to find strategic autonomy in foreign policy, and it's a trend. It's also same for China, as for Israel, same for Egypt, and same for Saudi Arabia, same for Turkey. It's a trend, and I think it's more about the international structure. And I define in my PhD thesis, I define that the current international system is in a transformation period. In this period, we see United States is in the center, but it's not unipolar. So it's more it's a kind of system that we will see the transformation in near future, and most of the countries in the region, especially for those the US allies, they are taking a counter policy towards the uncertainty about the future of the international system. So it's important. The rise of China important, but I couldn't have time to elaborate. But it's really important, and the announcement of agreements that are signed by China and the Gulf countries are very critical, and we see there in vision politics. Saudi Arabia have 2030 vision, and Kuwait has the same, Qatar has the same. All of the GCC countries, they have the same vision, but we are not quite sure that who is going to be leader country in the region in terms of increasing the engagement with China. But most probably United Arab Emirates will be the leader country.
Well explained. Thank you very much.
I think we.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the answer. Any other questions? It was interesting that one of the presenters asked another question to another presenter. So I expect the audiences ask a question normally, but still, it still counts. Okay. I think no more questions from the audiences. Then I will take the lead and ask questions to Mehmet, Şirin, Oğurlu. Your presentation has 2 or 3 divisions, and the last one I think is the main focus of your research. But still, I would like to ask that the reason why Bashar Assad was against the Western intervention, but UN is an international institution, of course, mostly dominated by the Western countries. That's right. But I would like to ask about the consideration of the Bashar Assad, the UN as an extension of the West. So any UN proposal to intervene into civil war, is it considered as an Western intervention or the international community intervention? Which one do you think?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm very honored with that one. 100% we can clearly say it in very specific areas when there is a cooperation or relationship with Russia, Iran, or many other countries which actually generally sided against the United States and West. If there is intervention to these parts, these regions or these countries, 100% we can say these organizations, international organization intervention, are clearly seen and an act by the West towards their international and also the regional interest. So Bashar Assad himself clearly felt the same way because he has seen the things that happened before the things happened in Syria. We also said in the presentation, as you also mentioned, the things happened in other states was exactly the same. Very clearly we can show, for example, demonstrate as an example, the things happened in Libya. The Muammar Gaddafi was a very great partner for the Russia for a very long time. And the speech that he had given before his body actually dragged into the streets by the demonstrations in the UN speech, he has always been talking about the dominance and also the power of the West towards these small countries, or actually the countries generally considered to be Muslims. So to answer your question, basically, of course, Bashar Assad and his government and Iran, and of course, most importantly, Russia, and some partly China, because they, in some resolutions in the Security Council, they vetoed, they used their veto power to use military intervention, the civil war in Syria. So clearly we can say 100% they saw that as an intervention towards their interest from the view of the Bashar Assad and government of Syria.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. But if the UN has grounded in Syria, even if it is short time, isn't it necessary to get the Security Council approval for that? So Russia is the member of the Security Council. So did Russia voted in favor of using UN peacekeeping force in Syria, even if it's short time?
But UNSMIS, United Nations Supervision Mission in Syria, was basically based on the very six proposal plan that being issued and started established by the Kofi Annan, as we mentioned in the presentation. These were predominantly aimed and aimed the objectives with the help to the civilians, with the humanitarian aid, that these generally things they were essential need. It wasn't something that to give an end to conflict. That was the next step. First, it was the civilian casualties to stop that one, but it wasn't political. But we are talking about, for example, as we said in other peacekeeping operations, normally they go in with the clear mandates and the objectives to give an end to civil wars and create or to support some opportunities, create some or establish some situations for peace talks. For Syria, it wasn't something like that. That was the main reason why China and Russia itself. And in fact, we've also mentioned the resolution was accepted, the one that you also mentioned. It was the six proposal plan aimed, were accepted actually, and Russia, China didn't take place against it, was of course based on, because it was aimed with the humanitarian aid and the protection of the civilians. It wasn't something like the political view. But if you're talking about after the chemical weapons, which the United States of America with Barack Obama proposed to the Security Council with the France and the UK approval, the Russia and the China strictly answered to these attempt and proposal that they were going to definitely use their veto power, because without clear investigation that the Bashar al-Assad government of Syria had used the nuclear weapon, sorry for that, I should say the chemical weapon, it cannot be intervened with the situation with 100% against the interest of the Russia and China. It practically means for Bashar al-Assad. I hope that answers your question, sir.
Thank you very much. It was a clear answer. I'm still waiting for the questions from the audiences, and any chance I haven't seen yet. So I will move on to my next question to next presenter, Mr. Mehmet Rakıpoğlu. You have mentioned about the concept of compartmentalization. It's generally used in international politics that the economic and political issues are different. So we need to focus on economics, and sometimes we can move aside from the political issues. So still, I have read about the compartmentalization, and the question was the same in that time, and I'm going to ask it to you. So compartmentalization, do you think that it's really working to separating economic and political issues, or actually it is leading to using economic relations as an instrument to solve the political issues between or among the countries?
Okay.
So
Thank
how
you
does
for
it
the
work
question.
in
Actually,
the Gulf countries?
Okay, actually, I didn't use this term. I used that the compartment politics, which is quite the same. But what I see, actually, this is not the term that I used by taking the academic literature. I made it up, and this is actually it has been told in Turkish. Compartment siyaseti, compartment politics. I mean, for example, you are a country and you have politics in Libya. You clash with another country, but in another area, you can cooperate with other countries, not in terms of economy, but it's about the politics. So you divide the region. In that regard, you have some specific areas that you can cooperate with Turkey. For example, Iran. With regard to Syria, Turkey and Iran couldn't easily cooperate, but they somehow managed to cooperate. But in other countries, in Iraq, they can't cooperate easily. Like just Libya, in terms of United Arab Emirates and Turkey. Turkey and United Arab Emirates were supporting warring parties. Turkey has been siding with the internationally recognized government, whereas the United Arab Emirates has been supporting Haftar. So in Libya, you can't cooperate. but in other areas you can cooperate. This is compartment politics. I made it up this term, so it's not the term that you talk about, but it's, of course, I think this is this could be implemented in the term that you spoke, because you can cooperate in economy, whereas you can have some kind of clash. It is also saying in United Arab Emirates and Turkey relations, because even though the tension was peak during the 1918 I mean, just 3 or 4 years ago, the economic relations were very good. The bilateral trade volume was almost 10 or 11 billion dollars. Even we were, the countries were criticizing each other. In politics, they were not cooperating, but in economy, they were cooperating. So it could be the same.
Okay, thank you. Still, we don't have more questions. I will ask a follow-up question if you don't mind, Mr. Mehmet Rakıpoğlu. You haven't mentioned it, but still there is an ongoing normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia. I don't know if it's totally completed but I think it's in the process. And that was pressurized by the Trump administration. And I think it's followed by the Biden administration as well. And on the other hand, we have the China's mediation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. They are ready to open their diplomatic relations and the consulates. So I don't know if it is right to put it in this way, but how do you think the regional relations, or Iran and the Gulf country relations, especially Saudi Arabia, between Saudi Arabia and Iran? Saudi Arabia has a pressure from the US to normalize with Israel, and the China, I don't know if it is forced or consented to have normal relations, but still China's mediation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So how do you consider this, I don't know, not conflict, but still there is a not normal relations. You have two discursively enemy countries, Israel and Iran, but you have common partner, or you will have common partner in the future.
It's an important point. In the paper that I wrote for Turkish Journal, I wrote a chapter. In this chapter, I argue that Israel is the first country which is bothered by this normalization process, because as you also follow that there was a initiative that is taken by Trump administration to implement the normalization with Israel that is launched in 2020. In Bahrain and United Arab Emirates normalize their ties with Israel and establish diplomatic relations. But when it comes to the normalization process with Iran, between GCC countries and Iran, Israel is bothered, really bothered, and I saw that there are at least 3 points that explain or express why Israel is bothered. The first one is the domestic politics. As you also follow from the media, there has been a kind of clash in Israeli domestic politics since the prime minister became Netanyahu. He became a prime minister, and this normalization process was a kind of his problem. He was accused of that he was responsible for the normalization between GCC and Iran. The second point is Israel's international relations, especially the relations with the United States. And the normalization has created a kind of breaks in the Israel and United States relations. And third point is Middle Eastern politics. And Israel was trying to establish a kind of front, anti-Iran front, with Arab regions, with Arab countries, by normalizing their tie. And it is an important point that the United States still pressuring Saudi Arabia to normalize ties with Iran, and there have been several articles published in Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, and other important journals. But what we see is that, especially by normalizing their ties with Iran, the positive size of these process is in favor of Iran, not in favor of Israel. So it's an important point, but it can be predicted that Saudi Arabia, which has re-established diplomatic relations with Tehran, will not participate the trend of normalization pattern with Israel in a short time, despite all positive signals. Of course, China is eager to normalize, to help, or to play a mediator role in normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia. But I think the latest developments have revealed that Saudi Arabia is in favor of Iran, not in favor of Israel. Even the US has used a kind of tools to pressure them.
Thank you very much. That's an interesting point. And still, I don't see any questions from the audiences, and I will move on the last presenter, Nurbanu.
Sorry.
The context of our presentation is really interesting, but I don't have any interest or the expertise in your area. But still, I would like to ask about the social and political differences between Turkey and Iran. And still you have interesting conclusion that they have similar green purchasing behavior. At least in Turkey, it's mostly discourse that Iran in Turkey is different from Iran. Their social ground is different. Even sometimes in political way, there are some discourses that we won't be an Iran or something like that from the religious perspective. So based on the general evaluation that Iran and Turkey has different social background, but still they have the same, or as you suggested, similar green purchasing behavior. How do you explain it? Is it actually there is no any social differences, so that's why we have similar green purchasing behavior, or even we have social and political differences on the ground, but still we have similar green purchasing behavior? What do you think of it? So I think I combined my political scientist background with your research. Sorry if it's the two different questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Actually, your question is actually related to my topic. No problem. Politics and societal issues. We are always combining them. Actually, I was also surprised about the conclusion of my research. Of course, we have different aspects. Turkey and Iran, or Turkish and Iranian society, of course. However, when it comes to green purchasing behavior or green products, we saw actually a little different conclusion and different aspects of these issues. Actually, Turkey and Iran have really similar behavior about environmental protection policies. I don't really examine the other countries in the Middle East. Of course, I think we have differences. However, Turkey and Iran really have a similar behavior about this, because environmental issue is, it is a common point around the world politics. We have some anxiety about environmental protection and climate change policy. It is not related to one country or the other country. We cannot accept for the other countries. Of course, that's why all reason lead us to common anxiety about environmental protection policies. The results, actually, as I said before, surprised me. However, this is the case. I don't know. I can clearly understand and answer your question. However, this is the case. This is the real scenario.
So it is the universal aspects of the protection of environment is in place here, not the social or the political differences.
Yeah.
Between the countries. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You.
I have exposed all my questions. So that's it from me, but still asking for the audiences to ask the questions and still no raised hand. So
Sorry.
That's gonna be okay. I have some sort. Okay. I think you are gonna ask a question, yeah, isn't it?
I want to thank all the participants that it was a very useful program for us. And if it is possible, I want to ask a question, Mr. Oğurlu. Can hear me?
Go on, yeah.
Okay. Can we describe the situation in Syria, not only civil war? Instead of, can we explain or description the situation in Syria as international terror attack on Syria? Can we describe the situation in that way? What do you think about that?
Thank you very much for your question. Very nice question. Actually, I should say that one. As we stated, yes, the reaction of the outsiders, we will talk about that very much. The situation became a disaster for the country. Almost over 600,000 people have been killed because of the war in Syria. And the internationals and the world countries, the super powerful countries, of course, we are talking, are directly responsible for it, we can call it, because of the proxy war also, in quote, we can say. They, one way or another, every country is supporting one way or another a opposition group or a part of the government or paramilitary organizations. To answer your question, of course, maybe it's not the right way to put it to say international terrorist attack, but we can say the number of the death because of this civil war is directly, all of the countries are involved had directly responsibility and accountability for it. But of course, we are talking about the organizations which are generally driven by these countries. Soon we are not going to find that answer that question enough, whether they're going to be accountable or whatnot. Thank you. I hope you got an answer to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then. We have 5 minutes early. Actually, we had already should finish it 5 minutes earlier, so it's fine. I would like to thank you, all the presenters, namely Mehrdad, Mr. Mehrdad Pasandide, and Mehmet Şirin Oğurlu, Mehmet Rakıpoğlu, and Nurbanu Bulgur. And thank you for the audiences for listening to the panel and joining us. And I would like to thank Mr. Gürkan Biçen Hocam, as he has the Iran map on the background, and it is the really suitable for the context of the conference. So
very interesting.
Thank you.
Very interesting background. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for keeping the map on the background for this conference. Okay. Thank you very much, and hope to meet you in the next panel. This is the end of our panel, and you can use the link in the program to join the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you for us.
Thank you, everyone.